I feel like there's a contemporary standard in the AAA space that walks the middle of the road, never stepping a foot wrong in the hopes that we simply like something. And Joss Whedon once said something along the lines of, I would rather make a thing 100 people love than thousands of people simply like. Yoko Taro very obviously hails from this school of thought as well, because what makes Nier Automata so special is that it marches to the beat of its own drum. It has something to say and knows how it wants to say it. It has its own identity. Not only this, but Automata is one of the first games I've played in a while that feels like a game through and through, because it pushes the limits of what the medium can do, not just graphically or in scope. The game takes advantage of all the medium's capabilities. It's not trying to be a movie, a book, even art, or a traditional game made up of systems alone. Nier experiments. It asks, how can we completely take advantage of this interactive form? What does interactivity grant creativity? How can this medium enhance player experience? In a way, Nier echoes games from the early PlayStation era, a time when games often took risks and played with the idea of interactivity and story. Anyone who played Nier, Gestalt, or Replicant knows this isn't new, but Automata has achieved what its predecessor ultimately couldn't, that being wider acclaim. So, if you haven't guessed already, I love this game, and if you'd like to stick around for a bit longer, I'll tell you why, spoiler-free. If not, thank you for stopping by, and I hope you have a nice day.
Everything that lives is designed to end. We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. Is this a curse?
The gameplay is surprising, every turn a surprise. It delves into different genres and systems so often that I can't actually talk about them all in detail, or I will ruin said surprise for those who haven't played the game yet. So I will be focusing on the action in Route A only here, but believe me when I say this is just one facet of play in a veritable sea of many. Combat is the word of the day in your first run-through of the game, where you play as 2B, and manages to toe the line between chaos and order, think DMC or Bayonetta, thanks in large part to Platinum Games' involvement. You can tailor your experience too, thanks to RPG elements in the form of chips, which you can equip and customize with skills that enemies drop. You also have a pod, and there are many to find in the world that can work as a Gatling gun, a missile launcher, and more. And these can be kitted out with different super attacks. Like pods, weapons are plenty. They can be found, bought, and upgraded with materials, and equipped in sets of 2 in the first playthrough. They have their own stories as well, and I suggest you read them, as they on occasion really add to the story and its characters. Nier Automata is also being sold as an open world title, but that's not really true, at least by modern conventions. The world is generous, sure, and there are lots of things to see and do within that space, but there are very obvious limits to the map. I actually think calling it an open world does the game a bit of a disservice. It's likening the play area to an entire continent of never-ending possibility or monotony, when in actuality, it's just a house within that continent, a house the owners are trying to sell, which requires them to transform its shortcomings and space issues into something appealing, which they do. Sarah Beanie would be proud. In short, the map may be small-ish, but these constraints allow for more attention to be paid to the missions and side quests, none of which are wasted. Another key element of play is bullet hell. As a rule, I don't tend to play genres with the word hell in the title, so thankfully, I'm not burned out or over-familiar with this type of play, because it very much is a part of the experience. I personally enjoyed it a lot because there are routes later on that implement it in new and interesting ways, all of which are fast and fluid as you jump in and jump back out of playstyles. I want to add here that the camera is really well utilised. Like the rest of the game, it shifts and changes. It's free form when in the open world, allowing you to explore and progress, then fixed or static, transforming the space into a side-scroller or a top-down dungeon crawler or an isotopic plane in some of the combat-heavy areas. All of this edits the combat sequences in a roundabout way and plays with the sense of space, how it might transform the feel of a situation or how it might force the player to adapt to it and the unique challenges that it may present. What I hope I'm communicating here is, Where Nier Automata really shines is how it surprises the player by constantly changing systems on the fly, but doing so in such a way that doesn't confuse, and instead feels like a natural sort of progression from systems we know to the ones we don't. You dip in and out of different mechanics in battle, but these are defined gradually and across multiple routes, 3 in total, which change the game literally in their own ways by introducing systems unique to that run. The last, or third go-around, is a culmination of all the systems you've learned up until that point, with a few extra thrown in, as it ramps up the difficulty for a final push. By this point, after, I guess, 30 plus hours, I would estimate, you're so practiced that there are moments where you're so in sync with the game it's hard not to feel buzzed. Not only this, but the story carries so much emotional weight that battles are so much more than a simple challenge or, I guess, payoff. Now onto the characters. Characters in video games, to me anyway, oftentimes feel a bit like puppets, bear with me, dressed up in Velcro suits, please bear with me, being flung at a giant sticky wall by the writers or developers who are hoping against hope that at least one of them will stick, will resonate. For some reason, characters that by all means should emotionally affect the player don't. When others do, it doesn't always boil down to whether or not they were written well. Sometimes it has to do with the way they feel to play, other times aesthetic, costume colours, motifs and styles, or what impression they give. Even catchphrases can become a core part of a character's likability. Think about the best video game characters around, and all of them have a strong sense of identity to play, feel, to look at, and audibly, I suppose, which never wavers.
Don't worry, loves. Cavalry's here.
Take all of that into account, and 2B and 9S resonate a lot, over time especially. Of course, they have been well written and characterized. I mean, they actually bounce off each other in a way not too dissimilar to the Prince and Farah in the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. And ultimately they come full circle in emotionally important arcs within the parameters of their fictional capabilities, that is. Kira Buckland and Kyle McCarley's performances are responsible in large part to the character's believability, but visually 2B and 9S are striking too. I predict many Nier Automata cosplays in future. And there is also a zen-like balance between the pair during play. 2B, though a much more external force, plays very smoothly, especially against 9S, who works to meet the same peak, only through a more internal focus. Much of what he does focuses on inner workings and functions. Humanity has been driven from the Earth by mechanical beings from another world. In a final effort to take back the planet, the human resistance sends a force of android soldiers to destroy the invaders. Now, a war between machines and androids rages on, a war that could soon unveil a long-forgotten truth of the world. The story, well, it looks pretty silly at first glance, but trust me when I tell you it hides hidden depths and effortlessly deals with its philosophical subject matter and mysteries with sensitivity, humor, and empathy. I suppose it's the relatively unassuming facade that actually allows the narrative themes to sneak up on you, especially when things start to wrap up in Route C. As with the gameplay, the story slowly unfurls with each run-through, adding more pieces to the puzzle, and honestly, that description doesn't quite do it justice because it implies that the main story alone expands, and it really does. But that would be neglecting the extra characters, the lore, the side stories, perspectives and dynamics that spring up across these routes. Needless to say that by the end, you're chewing on a lot of stuff, mulling over the themes and stories and information that Nier Automata presents, which is certainly familiar, but uniquely presented here for reasons I obviously can't delve into. Speaking of which, I'm genuinely considering covering these in a rumination, open discussion video of sorts, so let me know in the comment section if you'd be interested in that. Anyway, it just goes to show that a game doesn't have to resemble a movie to carry impact, emotional or otherwise. That isn't a dig, just a matter of fact, and beautifully demonstrated here. I loathe to talk about graphics these days, because in the grand scheme of things, it means little to me, unless of course it impedes my ability to play a game, dropping frame rates and freezing. for example. Sure, I respect and fully appreciate the beauty of something and how relevant departments do magnificent jobs. But out of all aspects of a game, the visual quality contributes less to my enjoyment of an overall experience, or put simply, poor graphics won't dampen an experience for me if a game does something unique or interesting elsewhere. That said, Nier is not the most beautiful looking game ever made. It's hardly the worst either, but if you're comparing it to titles like Horizon Zero Dawn or Uncharted 4, the difference is stark. And yet, what it lacks in glossy photorealism, something that would have been totally unnecessary in this game anyway, it makes up for in style. Visually, it's not unlike Galarian's, a curious blend of science fiction and cyberpunk styles with elements of the Gothic and, in this case specifically, high fantasy. It evokes an odd feeling of mysticism, an atmosphere fueled by both the past and the future. There are no two ways of saying it. Nier Automata's musical score is spectacular. Perhaps a shade or two less so when compared to the Nier Gestalt score, in my opinion, but I'm obscenely biased in that department, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I've been citing the Nier soundtrack as one of my favourites for years. If you don't believe me, check out some of my videos on the subject, which I will be linking either somewhere on screen or in the description box below. But when I say I favour one over the other, I am by no means saying that the Automata score is bad. It isn't. Quite the opposite, actually. It's astounding. The focus is clearly on evoking an emotional response from you. Keiichi Okabe's work here is exactly what a video game score should be. It enhances every moment you play, so that when you revisit it elsewhere, it transports you right back into the shoes of that character, or the situation you were tackling, or the location you were in at that time. I was also really impressed with how the music seamlessly transitions at various stages throughout the game. In some cases, instrumentals will move into vocal versions, and in others, well, I don't want to ruin any surprises. I just don't think I've seen a game with musical transitions this smooth before without frequent customary fade-outs or those unintentionally hilarious abrupt cuts. More importantly though, the score experiments. The music isn't just one proverbial note, but it's unusual in almost every way, like the rest of Nier Automata. It navigates varying styles easily. Hopefully I've conveyed, without telling you anything too spoilerific, the real strength of Nier Automata, the masterful juggling of genres, styles, themes, narratively, mechanically, musically, heck, in every facet of the game. And on a more emotional level versus a critical one, the game stays true to its own weird and wonderful identity, regardless of monetary or critical risk. Which is so unusual, especially where such a big publisher is concerned. Yoko Taro doesn't care if he alienates people. He has an idea of what he wants to create, and he does so. I, for one, am thankful that there will always be developers like this. All in all, I would much rather have a shorter game, a world with limits, and play an experience over and over with added layers, than a giant never-ending world and adventure lasting hundreds of hours with no real deviation from the formula. It's games like this that I feel truly passionate about and reminds me why I love the medium so much. It isn't perfect, but nothing ever is, and it needn't be. To quote John Blow, if you don't see a vulnerability in somebody, you're probably not relating with them on a very personal level. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I apologise for its weird lack of content. I really didn't want to talk about too much, so as to spoil it for those of you who haven't played it yet. I'm definitely considering making a sort of spoiler theme discussion video where I can really go into the things that I was fascinated by. Again, please let me know if you'd like to see that in the comment section. Thanks again, and I hope to see you all soon.